Well, the Washing Society is an exploration of a neighborhood laundromat in New York City, where we're from. And we were interested in looking at the people who work in a laundromat. So when you bring your clothes and drop it to the people who work there and have them wash and fold it for you. And I guess we were curious about their relationship to their work and to the customers, and we also interviewed people, and from those interviews wrote text that became the dramatic portion of the film. So it's both a documentary and a kind of dramatic reenactment. And then there's also a lot of choreography that came out of the work of doing laundry.
We were really interested in, first of all, in the relationship between people who do services in a city and people who receive and pay for those services. What kind of intimacy develops? What kind of conversation, if any? How strangers come into contact with each other and have an exchange of their inner souls, or just do they have exchange of money and sort of useful elements of work that allow people to continue. And we were thinking about how that is a historical situation. And in the United States, that goes all the way back to the late 19th century, when a group of African American women, 3,000 of them, gathered together in Atlanta, Georgia, to organize, which is actually kind of amazing because today is International Women's Day and we're talking about women organizing. So this was just after the Civil War in the United States, where black women were free. It didn't last for very long because there became other forms of oppression, but during that time they were able to organize, and they were able to say, and they were washerwomen. So they said, we want more money per pound or per kilo, as we would say today, for our work. And if we don't get paid, we're going to shut down our services, which will shut down the whole city. So we wanted that legacy, that history, that anger, that energy from another century to come through the film, which is something that cinema can do. You can have two time periods simultaneously or parallel. And so that's why we have the black washerwoman, who's played by a woman named Jasmine Holloway, in the frame, and she's like a ghost for that past, and then she begins slowly to be able to speak.
I think we should say that the film came out of, we had started this as a performance. It was a site-specific performance that we did in laundromats. And then we also did it in small theaters and for unions. But I think the way it layered and kind of unfolds, if you will, to use that word, happened in the making of the film, the kind of gradual revelation that there are these performative elements. So that's exactly, you're right, but it happened, I think, in the making of the film, the timing of that, or the rhythm of that revelation. I think it's very different in the performance, but it kind of keeps going back and forth and is more clear from the beginning. Whereas in the film, there's this sense of a discovery of it, which we had in the kind of editing of the film. We didn't know exactly how it would happen, that you would become aware of the performative versus the, quote, real.
I think that one of the things we really wanted to do from the start was to make apparent the machinery of a film, as what we are trying to make apparent the machinery of the service industry. So most of the time in a film, you have a very tight hierarchy. You have the director and then everybody else under the director. But it seemed problematic to us that we wouldn't reveal ourselves as the people in that position of authority, or that we would hide behind all the conventions that we were so uncomfortable with. So we felt like we needed to share our voices, and we needed to say, in a sense, everything you're seeing, whether it's a fictionalized interpretation of something from the past or something we observed as we were doing our research, or actual washer women and men were doing their jobs in their setting. Either way, they are forms of documentary and they are forms of performance that meld together.
Yes, that was a performance. So that was a documentation. Somebody in the audience with a video camera documented one of our first performances. So that was the way it was. When we did it as a performance, in that particular laundromat, the dancer performer was on top of the machines, kind of doing this whole movement. So that I actually love that moment. For me is, you sort of are seeing what the performance was. It's a documentation of the performance, which is different than the filming of making the documentary, where we sort of set it up.
Well, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Well, I was just going to say, most of the time, again, in a film environment, even sometimes a documentary environment, the goal is to create a very hermetic space, to create a space where you have absolute control. So you do a lot of, people in documentary do a lot of reenactments. We want to show this factory, but there's too much noise, so we're going to shoot on a Saturday, which is really not a work day. So we actually gave ourselves a lot of challenges. Sometimes we would have control. We would shoot very early in the morning, and we would pay money and close down the laundry so that we could have good sound. And then other times we just let the laundry continue, and we had to work with that rhythm. And so it's kind of a back and forth on the level of production, on the level of those extremes of whatever happens in the laundry today is what we have to face, to we know who's going to walk in the door because she's an actor.
That you could see the different ways of the different choices that were being made as a documentary, even though those are often hidden.
Well, we worked with a wonderful sound artist. His name is Stephen Vitiello, and one of the skills that he brings to the table to share with us is that he takes sounds from the real world, what some people might call musique concrète. He takes and he transforms them into a musical experience. And so we wanted to actually listen to the rhythms of a laundry and the water sounds, the machine sounds, the people walking, the chatter of the workers and the customers, and elevate it a little bit in the sense of creating a hyper-awareness of those rhythms, not just the rhythm of the work. So, and then of course, there's a whole history of musicals. And since we were going in the direction of performance, why not go all the way?
We did a lot of walking around and going into, just walking into places and asking if they would like to speak with us and telling them about the project. And we did it for this project. We were researching for over a year before we kind of did anything. And we went both with a Chinese translator with us because neither of us speak Chinese, and also we tried speaking Spanish. Lynne speaks Spanish, but it wasn't enough. So the performer, Vera Alba, who was dancing on the machines, she speaks Spanish fluently. She's Puerto Rican, and she came with us. And that was how we met Margarita. She was able to connect with her. And just to talk about Margarita, we actually had her come to talk to us several times. And I thought it was really interesting how she became like a performer herself. Because when we shot her, it was not in her own laundromat. We brought her to a laundromat near us where we live in Brooklyn. And so she was kind of performing herself in a sense, but speaking, that was her life that she was talking about. So again, she became a kind of performer as well, even though it was her own life. And maybe you want to talk about Wing a little, Mr. Ho?
Oh, so there's as you saw, a male laundry worker, Mr. Wing Ho, and he was extremely cooperative and unusually cooperative, and actually pleased to be participating in the film. And probably the reason that he was so comfortable doing it is because he owns his own business. And to have that kind of strength of ability to run his own life is so unusual in this business. Most of the workers are women, and most of those workers are sort of vulnerable to the decisions and the whims of their bosses, and a lot of times their husbands. They would say, we would want to interview one of the laundry workers, and usually she would say, okay, we'll make an appointment, and then we would come, or she would call us and she would say, I'm sorry, my boss says I can't talk to you, or I'm sorry, my husband says I can't talk to you. And often that was because the bosses were worried we were going to try to expose something about the working conditions, or their immigration status was precarious. And so they were worried about that whole idea of documenting. Like, if my face is on camera, does that compromise my situation here in the United States?
And that's very real, those concerns. And so a lot of the text, I don't know if you remember, was like people saying to us, I don't want to talk about it. Why do you want to know? And I think that's another impulse for the film, that this is this kind of hidden labor, something that we don't either see or pay attention to. And so how do you give that space? How do we, who we are, two white women, give that space? Who are we to kind of make those questions? So that was also part of the film for us.
It's almost like that idea of someone being off camera, in a mystery or something. The person who says, or the president, or there's this constant reference to the boss. But we actually don't show any bosses because we want to show the workers. And so it actually becomes I didn't realize it till you asked the question, but it becomes a conceit of the film, that the boss is hovering over everything.
Well, there are several places in the film where it's purely observational, where Lynne had we went around. It was another day of like walking and just kind of going into places, and those moments we would ask people, can we, do you mind? And they sort of were waving to the camera. And then a couple other times where we just were shooting, and they knew we were shooting, but we basically just did it. Which in a way was, questionable, I suppose, in terms of the ethics of it. But they became part of the film. So it was more an observational day that we were walking and sort of shooting. Do you want to say
But those
anything
are
else?
always, that question of permission is so important. And people ask for something called a release, which is a form that says, it's okay for my image to be in front of the camera. With those images, where we were usually, I'll say it in feet, but we were usually maybe 40 feet away. The people could see us, but we actually didn't get releases from those people. And it's kind of comes out of the whole history of photography, street photography. You don't always ask, but maybe in retrospect, we should have asked absolutely everybody who was in front of the camera.
And I think it's interesting because you're not the first person who's brought her up, the woman at the end. And I think maybe our perception of her has been altered because of seeing the whole film also. Because in a way, I don't know if we spent that much more time on her than some other observational moments, but yeah, I think she was aware of us, actually, that woman, but that there wasn't an exchange, and we didn't try to talk to her. It was a moment where we just said we're going to watch her. And also the nature of how her laundromat was more commercial, where they were pressing uniforms, actually. I don't know if you noticed that, but.
One of the things that we did in the film with both the actors who are workers and the laundry workers who are they're all workers, is that we paid them, and that actually is a decision that we made that breaks pretty much all the rules of documentary, because usually there's an assumption that if you pay someone, then that person says what you want them to say and performs in the way that you expect them to. And so if there's no money exchange, then there's a kind of privilege on the part of the person on camera to do what he or she wants to do. But we also felt like it was taking their time, and the whole idea of I treat you professionally, you treat me professionally. So of the 3 real workers, we paid 2 of them, and I now think, looking back, realize that we spent time with Mr. Ho, the man who owns his own business, and I don't think we paid him.
No.
And he seemed to be pleased, and I hope he'll come to we haven't had our New York premiere, but we've been traveling. This is our international premiere here at Punta de Vista.
We didn't talk about Jasmine's grandmother.
Oh, yeah, please
I don't know.
talk about
So Lulu Holloway, I actually am very close friends with Jasmine's aunt, which is how I met Jasmine, the actress. And in the process of creating the performance, which was a devised performance, so we had some of the script, but we developed a lot of it with the actors. She told us that her grandmother worked in a laundromat and that she wanted to talk to her about it. And so we said, yes, that would be great if you could interview her. And then at a certain point we said, we'll come film the interview. So that section where Jasmine is interviewing her grandmother, she discovered things that she didn't know. Her grandmother had never told her. For instance, the strike that her grandmother describes to her. And Lulu worked from 1968 to 1999 in a commercial, it was more of a commercial laundromat. But I think that was a really interesting process too, to have Jasmine, our actor, discovering this story with us. It was very moving for her to find this out about her grandmother. And we found out later her grandmother was very reluctant to talk and didn't want to, said, I don't want to talk about it, like so many other people said to us. And then Jasmine said, I'll pay you, Grandma. I'll give you, and we didn't know this. So later we found out that happened. But I think you can actually see her kind of opening up, Lulu, that at first she was very reluctant to talk, and then she did. And that was really great.
And that also is another aspect of this whole project, this sort of collaborative project, where performers become part of the production. They, both Jasmine, who plays the African-American laundry worker activist, also becomes, in a sense, an interviewer and almost like an associate producer. She just organizes one of our shoots, and it's with her grandmother, and she works on the questions. So that kind of flow back and forth from who's behind the camera and who's in front of the camera is really an integral part of our process.
No cámara, por favor.
好難講，壞主意，
No grabaciones.
唔好搞我。如果
Si
佢
te
哋見到
ven,
你，
te pueden atrapar.
可能會捉住你。
Si te ven.
如果佢哋見到你，
I think we haven't had that happen yet. The sort of when you were saying we haven't shown the film, it's so new. Mm-hmm. And I think we very much want to figure out a good way to do that. And will, I'm sure. Actually, in past work that you've done, that's been very much a part of it.
Yeah, I've made other films, a lot of other experimental documentaries, And often I bring, as often as I can, I bring the people who were in the film to an exhibition of any kind. And often there's a reluctance to speak in public. And again, you sort of offer them permission or license. You say whatever you want to about your experience of working on this film. So that question of how have you been changed by the fact that a camera and a crew decided that what you do is important enough to be in a movie, not just a film. I always say, when it becomes a movie, it's like that. There's that funny distinction. Then it becomes part of society, and the work that you do is recognized. And so, probably the person we've spoken to the most is Margarita. I personally have spent more time with her alone. She seems excited about it, and I think she'll be there with her 2 sons for the New York premiere.
And I did go back to see Mr. Ho. It was already 2 years ago or longer. And he was very excited. And I spoke with his daughter, and so we're going to contact him and have him come for sure and have more of a conversation, I think, after they see it. And but as far as seeing the final thing, they haven't yet. So